when we're talking about the adoption of a leading practice, we say it shouldn't just be a financial thing, but there are other factors that we need to consider. And Peter's given a really good motivation for the financial side, as well as some other things. And I'm going to just perhaps elaborate a little bit on what Peter has already given us. So let's look at that, the value case for good drilling, charging, and blasting. We're going to look at that in a little bit of detail. Well, as I said, there's the business case that can be made, and Peter has given us good documented evidence why rands and cents can be made if we get the drilling and blasting right. But of course, there's the other side, the indirect influences, those that perhaps are a little bit more difficult to measure in terms of the rands and cents. We'd have to dig down a little bit. There are rands and cents to be made, but that's not that obvious. But let's first of all look then at the business case. And the first thing I want to say is that, of course, there will be costs involved. If we want to do drilling and blasting properly, there may be some additional costs that perhaps we are not actually bearing at the moment. Perhaps we need to spend more on training. So this may be an additional cost. And of course, perhaps if we're going to get drilling right, perhaps drill rigs may be the way to go, or some new kind of equipment. And so that would be an additional cost. But of course, there are additional incomes, and that's the part that I'm not going to go into too much detail. I'll show you a slide in a moment. But we can certainly see there will be increased productivity if we get the drilling and the blasting right. And of course, there are other things that, other financial savings that we can enjoy. There would be, obviously, we anticipate a reduction in explosives, explosives being more effectively used in the holes that we drill. Perhaps reducing the number of holes we drill. I get an impression that there are a lot of extra holes drilled in our industry and never used. So if we basically get that streamlined, it would be a major help. Then, of course, we've talked a little bit about the mine call factor, and if we get our drilling and blasting right, the waste that we mine might be reduced. And, of course, the reduced mineral loss into the footwall that might be fractured, perhaps through bad drilling and blasting. But let me just show you a little exercise I did, and Peter did a fine job of giving us some numbers, and so I'm just going to point out a few things to you here. So I took a panel, 30 meters long, stoping width of 1 meter, advanced 1 meter, and I've said, look, if we don't do our blasting right, whereas let's assume we're getting 1 meter if we got it right, perhaps 80% of that 1 meter would be what we anticipate. The density would be the same. I've been very optimistic and said 10 grams a ton. Peter, you've got plenty of places like that, haven't you? So, anyway, it makes it easier for the calculations. All of these things would be the same, the grams per ton. The mineral loss, I'm saying that perhaps, and Peter alluded to that, perhaps 5% loss in our stope. I haven't even considered the loss we might experience in the gully and the ore passes. Non-fracturing of the host rock, I'm saying that perhaps we would have a reduction, perhaps 10%, because we're fracturing the host rock, and therefore additional losses there. Dilution, perhaps a little bit there. Exchange rate I put in as 11, but it's this morning 11.21, and the mineral price I think is 11.60 this morning. But just look at that. If we got it right, we would literally, the revenue, the income that we would get would be 328,000 versus 179,000. About only half would be got through bad blasting. So we could immediately see that there is huge benefit financially for getting these things right. And as Peter pointed out, you don't have to get them a lot right. Just small changes could make huge differences for us. Well, let's now look at the indirect influences and see what some of the things are that we could benefit from if we got this whole issue of our blasting right. And the first thing that I want to look at are the people factors. So if we got drilling and blasting right, what influence, what impact would that have on our people? Let's have a look at that. Well, I think employees would feel safer, and the net result of that they would really actually perform better. They would really feel that they're under more competent hanging wall. There would be fewer falls of ground. And of course, Peter mentioned Section 54s. We hope that we would experience fewer Section 54s if we were able to maintain a much more even and regular hanging wall. What about interpersonal relations? I think these would improve. I think if you're having less problems in your stope because the place is falling apart and the support isn't there, let's face it, there's less opportunities for aggressive interaction between management and workers. And if you've got good IR carrying on in the stope, that's good for business. And I think there would be also opportunities to give more positive feedback. We're always saying, guys, you need to reinforce good behavior. And yeah, if we got better situations underground, the interpersonal relations would improve as we have more opportunities to positively input into the lives of our workers and say, well done, now we're getting this right. This is excellent work. Less physical work. Well, I think basically if we are getting it right, we're having to clean less waste out of the place, we're getting our fragmentation right, we're getting our face shape right, and effectively there's basically less problems in our stope, and there is a reduced pressure on our face time. And I hear that all the time. As we go around the industry, people tell me, do you know what the face time is of our current workers? And it's very, very little time these days. And we need every opportunity to somehow give more time to people, or when when they've got these short times, they need to be doing the essential work. If you don't do it, it leads to shortcuts, which is in fact what I mentioned here. So completion of all required tasks would take place in the shift if you didn't have all these other problems that are created through the drilling and blasting mishaps. And effectively, you would really reduce the shortcuts that people take. And I honestly believe that many shortcuts are taken in our industry because people, sure, do have a short time to do work, but many of the problems that are created take a long time to fix, and either they're not fixed, and they carry on, and then we find that we've got real problems. And then finally, I think there would be pride in the workplace and maybe a feeling of security with bonus systems and payments for people. There'd be better housekeeping, sweepings up to date. I think a little bit later on, Richard Ulifier will talk about his experience of the mine, and one of the things that impressed me in his preparation of his talk was how he had his sweepings up to date. He got good face advance, he got good meters broken, but he also had his sweepings up to date. And so perhaps as we get pride into our workforce to say, look, this is how we're doing business, it's going well, we may actually see great benefits there. Well, let's quickly look then at the ground conditions. Let's have a look and see what that might result in. Well, fracturing, I've mentioned this already, Peter mentioned it. Better footwall conditions, and of course the loss of minerals into the footwall. When I worked for the Chamber of Mines research organization many years ago, and then it became the Mining Tech, we had a research project where we were looking at losses in the footwall, and it was staggering. The amount of gold that was lost in the footwall of our stopes through poor blasting. So we would hope that we would reduce our mineral loss. Then, of course, better hanging wall control. So not only will we stop damaging the footwall, but we also stop damaging the hanging wall, and there is a reduced need for support. If you've got a beautiful hanging wall, well, the obvious is you're going to be spending less on supporting it. So there's something to be looked at. Then better face shape. So often our faces are crumb because one hole goes off, or that one hole isn't drilled properly, or it hasn't been charged in the same position, so you end up with a crooked face. Well, that becomes a very difficult thing to clean, delaying the amount of time you've got to do work. It's difficult to get the support in because sometimes it's close and sometimes it's far away, and maybe you take shortcuts there. Reduce stress raising points. If you haven't got sharp corners on your stope, you've got a flat shape, you are less likely to have kind of outbursts, strain bursts from your face. And so we foresee reduced face seismicity. And then the stoping with control. Obviously, we've mentioned this before as well. By controlling that, by not damaging the hanging wall, one may well be able to do undercuts and keep your stoping wet. And of course, the improved mine core factor, because you're not diluting your grade with all of this waste into the mill. Well, we've looked at that. Let's go back. The value case for good drilling and blasting. Is there a case? Peter, I think, made a strong point. I hope I'm making a point. Let's just look at it. If you look at that, there's a seesaw, and on the left we've got a couple of things, and I'm going to show you what they are, but on the right you can see that there are an overwhelming number of things that are weighing in favor of bringing the seesaw down. And the things on the left are, sure, we're going to have to spend some time on training, maybe, new equipment, maybe we're going to have to pay something for equipment maintenance, and maybe we might even need to outsource some service providers to help us. But on the other side, the things that I've already mentioned, and I'll go through them quickly, improved health and safety. There's no doubt in my mind that as we do a reduction in fracturing of our ground, we're going to actually see much better safety in our slopes. So low Section 54s, lower hospitalization and medical costs, no people being injured or fewer people. Lower SIMRAC levies. Do you realize that every accident you have, your mine actually pays a levy to the Mine Health and Safety Council? So it's in your interest to keep your injuries and fatalities to minimum. And then, of course, there's a reduced insurance premiums as you get safety better. Improved slope conditions, unfractured hanging wall, smooth footwall, lower mineral loss, less support required, less work for the crew. Staff turnover decreases and absenteeism will decline. Less at-risk workforce. Bigger bonuses have the possibility of paying this and more productive face time. Productivity improvement, greater face advance for glass, increased monthly centaurs broken, greater mine profits, and of course the mine becoming much more sustainable. And Peter's given us very convincing figures regarding that. And then finally, the better fragmentation of the rock. Cleaning becomes easier, transportation improvement, billing optimized, mineral loss reduced. So that brings us, I think there is a case to be made that we should actually pursue this. Well, in conclusion then, perhaps that picture sums up what our drilling and blasting and charging is at the moment. That railway line will get you to the destination, there's no doubt about it. You could probably push a trolley along there and you could get to the end. But you can see you won't be going very fast, and you may actually have some derailments. And I'm sorry to say that at the moment, our drilling and charging and blasting may be going along these tracks. We can do it better. This next picture is what we need. Can you imagine the speed at which the train could move along those tracks? How you would not have any derailments. How things would just kind of work together. And I would suggest that's where we're headed in our industry. We need to go from those crooked, rather broken tracks to tracks that are straight like that. And I believe we have the wherewithal, we have the knowledge, we have the will to do it. So in conclusion then, there is merit in improving drilling and blasting practice. Absolutely, we agree with that. There are critical few things. In other words, there are not hundreds of things we must do. There are a few things. If we just major on those, we could actually make a huge difference. Safety, particularly falls of ground safety, I'm convinced will improve dramatically. And then, of course, improved drilling and blasting will contribute to the sustainability of our mines in all sectors. I thank you for that.